I've pulled out the lab again, and I have already done the housekeeping configurations that we did on router 1 for switch 1. So we're set to go. Switch 1 already has a name, which is SW1, as you see with the prompt, and we're already in privilege mode. We are going to create VLAN 150. Now I'm going to minimize switch 1 for a second. So we're going to create VLAN 150 where my cursor is, where my mouse is, right here on switch 1. And then we're going to add VLAN 150 to port 24. So port 24 on switch 1 is connected to router 1's port 00. The reason we're doing that is access links are usually connected to N devices. So a PC would be an N device. A router, in this case, is also going to act as an N device. So router 1 is going to go into VLAN 1. Router 1 is going to go into VLAN 150, which means we need to put port 24 of switch 1 into VLAN 150. Alrighty, so I'm in switch 1. I go to my global config mode by executing configure terminal or config T. And then to create VLAN 150, remember, we just simply say VLAN 150. I hit enter, and I go into config VLAN mode, and let's just name this CCNA since this is a CCNA class. I exit out of my config VLAN mode, and then I check my VLAN database by saying do show VLAN brief. I hit enter, and I see that VLAN 150 is active and has been created on the switch, and the name is CCNA. However, VLAN 150 does not have any ports assigned to it yet. So we're going to take port 24. Right now, by default, it belongs to VLAN 1. And we're going to move it over to VLAN 150. Before we do that, I'm going to go to priv mode by saying exit, and I'm going to show you port 24. So to look at a port, you say show, then this is interface F0/24. So interfaces, show interfaces, fast Ethernet, because that's the type of port it is. Ethernet is 10 megabits per second. Fast Ethernet is 100 megabits per second. Then I'm going to say 0. So to the Cisco port naming convention, the first number that you see after the word fast Ethernet is 0. This is the slot number. So when I say 0, this means it's asking for the switch's slot number. Our switches in this lab only have slot number 0. So you have slot number 0, look at where I'm highlighting, port 1. Slot number 2, slot number 0, port 2. Slot number 0, port 3. Slot number 0, port 24. So the first number is always the slot number. If I had another slot on this switch, then I would have slot number 1, port 1, slot number 1, port 2, and so on and so forth. If I had a third slot or a fourth slot, then you would say FA 3/1, 3/2, 3/ all the way to 24. Since we have only one slot and the slot numbers start at 0, all the port names start with 0/something. So this first 0 is your slot number. Then I say slash, and then it's the port ID. Port 24 has the ID of 24. So I'm going to look at interface fast Ethernet 0/24. I hit enter. Here's my command. Or actually, let me clean this out a little bit. So here's my command. Right now, fast Ethernet 0/24 is down, and the line protocol is down. Now, by default, ports on a switch are usually up. You don't have to do anything special to bring them up. However, this port on the other end, if you remember, is connected to router 1's F0/0. On a router, by default, ports are actually down. So if the other side of the link is down, our local side is showing down. Then you see the MAC address for the port. Right after that, the next line, you see something that says MTU 1500 bytes. MTU stands for Maximum Transmission Unit. Okay? Maximum Transmission Unit. This is the maximum packet size, which is the protocol data unit for layer 3, and I know we haven't moved to layer 3, but sometimes in CCNA this happens. You have to jump ahead. So the protocol data unit at layer 3 is called the packet. This is the maximum size for a packet that can traverse this port. So the maximum transmission unit for Ethernet, since this is an Ethernet port, is 1500 bytes. That could be a test question. Once again, the maximum transmission unit for Ethernet is 1500 bytes. The bandwidth in kilobits per second, kbp, it should actually say kbps. It says kbit. Okay, that's fine. The maximum bandwidth for this interface is 100,000 kilobits a second, or 100 megabits a second. The rest you don't need to look at. Actually, over here this says that this port is set to half duplex. By default, fast Ethernet ports are in full duplex, but for some reason this port is set to half duplex. We're going to go ahead and change that soon. Next, at the very end of the command, I scroll down by hitting the space bar, you see 0 collisions and 0 late collisions. In an ideal situation, this counter should always remain 0. If you see that this counter is incrementing at a rapid pace, you know that you have either a speed and or a duplex mismatch. So when you have a speed and or a duplex mismatch with the other end of the link, you get an increment in the collision counter. So we have gone ahead and looked at our interface, fast Ethernet 0/24. Now we're going to make it an access port. So I go to my global configuration mode, configure terminal, and we have already created VLAN 150. I'm going to scroll up. And you see we already created VLAN 150 with name CCNA. Now I'm going to apply that VLAN to port 24. So the rule of thumb with Cisco is to make a change to a port, you must first go into the port. And how do I go into port 24? I say interface, fast Ethernet 0/24, and I hit enter. I could have also said, let me exit out of here. I could have also shortened this to INT for interface, F for fast Ethernet, 0/24, and it would work just the same. Just saves us a bit of typing. So the first command I'm going to do is switch port mode access. Now, switchboard mode access tells this port that you are unconditionally going to be an access port. So I hit enter, and at this point, this port has become unconditionally an access port. Next, I'm going to say switch port access VLAN 150. The second command, I have told the port that you are going to be part of VLAN 150 at this point. So now this port is an access port and it carries VLAN 150, or it is part of VLAN 150. In effect, router 1 port F00 just became part of VLAN 150 because that's the port on the router that's connected to the switch port 24. If you look here again. So since port 24 on this switch became part of VLAN 150, the device connected at the other end is router 1 port F00. That also became part of VLAN 150. Now let's look at our show commands. Let's test this out. I'm going to exit out of here and then exit out again back to priv mode. And I'm going to say show VLAN brief. Now you see port 24 is missing from the list of ports for VLAN 1, and it has been moved down to VLAN 150 as proof to us that port 24 has become part of VLAN 150. Let's look at the port in a little bit more detail. Show interface fast Ethernet 0/24, and then we add the word switch port. And then we hit enter. Now, a few things you want to pay attention to in this command. The name of the port is port 24. That's easy enough. The switch port on the switch side, yes, it is enabled. The administrative mode, we just did the command switch port mode access. Because of that, the administrative mode says static access. The access mode VLAN that we have created is VLAN 150 with name CCNA. Those are the fields I want you to look at for now. Now, I'm going to show you a little shortcut. We are going to go to switch 2. Now, switch 2, port 24, is connected to router 2, port F00. And you're going to see in a minute that switch 3, port 24, is connected to router 3, F00, and switch 3, port 24, is connected to router 3, F00, and switch 4, port 24, is connected to router 4, F00. So I've kept it pretty consistent in this lab. So I'm going to go to switch 2, and I'm quickly going to get the housekeeping done. Okay, that's the housekeeping done. I give switch 2 the name SW2, and I did all the commands that we had covered previously in housekeeping. I did shortcut versions of the command, well, some of them. I did not set any passwords because from now on I'm going to avoid setting password, lest we forget and then we can't log into a device. This time, I'm not going to create VLAN 150. Once again, I'm going to put switch 2 port 24 in VLAN 150, but I'm going to skip that step of creating the VLAN before assigning it to a port. So the two steps to creating an access port are create a VLAN and then assign a VLAN to the designated port that you need to assign it to. I'm just going to go straight to port 24, and I'm going to say switch port mode access. That turns it into an access mode port. And I'm going to say switch port access VLAN 150. Now remember, we haven't created VLAN 150 yet. So what happens when I hit enter? Well, let's see. It says access VLAN does not exist. Creating VLAN 150. So the switch actually does the first step for you. I do not recommend this for the exam. I, however, do recommend this when you're at work and trying to save time. I'm going to exit out and look at my switch port. Show VLAN brief. And you see that port 24 is part of VLAN 150. Now, however, I did not name the VLAN as CCNA, so it's created a default name called VLAN 150. So let's go ahead and name it CCNA. VLAN 150, and then go into VLAN 150, and then name it CCNA. So now if I check my VLAN database, do show VLAN brief, you see that my VLAN name has changed from the default name, which was VLAN 150, to CCNA. Again, I'm going to look at my switch port in more detail. Show interface, fast Ethernet 0/24, switch port. The keyword switch port at the end. And I see that the port is enabled. Administrative mode is static access. Access mode VLAN on that port is VLAN 150 with the name CCNA. Now, I'm going to go off camera for a minute, and I'm going to finish up the configuration between switch 3, port 24, and router 3, and the configuration on switch 4, port 24, and router 4.